Clausen.
Good morning, Peg.
Sister Denis Ellen.
That's correct.
How did you get Denis Ellen?
Well, we were given three choices. My first choice was Sister Mary Hans, my father's name. My second choice was Sister Hans Helen, my mother and father. My third choice was Denis Ellen, after my two sponsors. So I think Mother Gerald chose the Irish choice instead of the Scandinavian one.
So who are your sponsors?
Sister Denis Ann and Sister Ellen Marie Murphy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from
Okay.
St. Nick's.
Yes, yes. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Now that we know where you were, where did you grow up and your siblings and your schooling?
Okay. Well, I was the fourth child of my mother and father, Helen and Hans. I was born on the northwest side of Chicago in Lewis Memorial Hospital at 2:01 a.m. on Ash Wednesday.
Oh,
And I lived on the northwest side. I was the fourth until I was 2, and then my mother and father moved to the southwest side, where they had 4 more children. So I have 5 brothers and 3 sisters.
Oh.
And moving to the southwest side is where actually I met up with the Adrian Dominican Sisters, who were teaching at St. Nicholas of Tolentine
right,
Parish.
right.
And all 8 of us went through St. Nick's. And I want to go back a little bit to my family. My mother's family, she grew up with 12 brothers and sisters, 9 girls, 3 boys. Her 3 youngest sisters became Sisters of the Holy Cross
Oh my.
from St. Mary's, South Bend.
Uh-huh.
And her aunt had 9 boys and a girl, and her 3 youngest boys were Columban missionaries. So as I grew up in a household with many sisters and priests,
Right,
missionaries.
Right. That was the era at that time,
Yes,
too. That
it was,
just
yeah.
part of being Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my father was born in Denmark, and he was raised Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
But the year before he and my mother were married, he studied to become a Catholic, unbeknownst to my mom, because she had left him and said, you know, we can't get married, you're not Catholic. And so she didn't see him for a whole year, and one day he knocked on her door and said, I'm becoming a Catholic. If your Catholic faith meant so much to you that you wouldn't marry me, it must be important. So my dad was a convert, and a very good one, and
Well,
a very
nice
proud
love
Catholic.
story.
It was.
Uh-huh.
And they actually met at night school. My dad came over from Denmark when he was 18, and he went to night school to learn English. And my mom was in night school because she had to quit high school in order to help, to get a job to help feed her 12 brothers and sisters. So that's how they met. I needed to put that story in there.
It's important to you.
Yeah,
It's your life.
it is. And family is very important to me and to all of us. And so my brothers and sisters are very close to me. 3 of them are in heaven, 3 of my brothers.
Wow.
And there are 5 of us left, and we get together as many times as we can.
And where do they all live?
I have a sister in Seattle, a brother in Danville, California. My oldest sister lives in Santa Cruz, California, and my younger brother lives in Los Angeles. So
Oh,
all
out
my
west.
family's out west.
But they all grew up in Illinois.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was a novice, my whole family moved to the West Coast. And then Mother Gerald, when I made profession, sent me to the East Coast.
So where did you go to school?
I went for 8 years to St. Nicholas.
Nicholas, right.
And then Mother Gerald came to visit St. Nicholas when I was in 8th grade. Prior to that, when I was in 7th grade, I already knew that I wanted to be an Adrian Dominican sister. And Mary Ann Yans, who's also one of our sisters, we kind of grew up in the same neighborhood. So the summer after my 7th grade, we decided to go on this little pilgrimage. And we went first to St. Mary's, South Bend, to visit my 3 Holy Cross aunts. And then we got on the bus and came to Adrian to visit Sister Teresa Cinnamon, who was Sister Josette Marie then.
God, you were good friends, the two of you.
That's right.
She saved my life years ago, yes.
Yes. Well, we visited her and then came back, and we both agreed we wanted to be Dominicans, not Holy Cross. And so in 8th grade, there still was a prep school here. And so Mother Gerald had come and signed me up to come in for the prep school. And I had asked my mom and dad, and of course my dad said, well, why don't you want to be a Holy Cross sister? It's closer. And I said, Dad, I want to be an Adrian Dominican sister. So he said, okay. Well, I was all set to come to the prep school in the middle of the summer. I got a note from Mother Gerald saying they discontinued the prep school. I said, oh. So
what year was that?
That was 1956.
Oh, okay.
And so Sister Ella Marie said, my sister had gone to Visitation High School, which were the Cincinnati Dominicans. Mm-hmm. You could go there, or I'll give you a scholarship to go to the Mount or St. Joseph Academy. Well, I had been to Adrian and fallen in love with Adrian, so I chose the academy.
Oh, okay.
So for my freshman and half my sophomore year, I was a student at St. Joseph Academy, and then I entered the middle of my sophomore year.
What was it like living on this campus back when you were
Well, to tell you the truth, after I entered, I always said the academy was stricter than the postulate.
Oh.
But we got into
Boarding
mischief.
school, yeah.
We got into mischief in spite of all the borders they put around us. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. But I was happy that now I was old enough to enter. Actually, I had my sweet 16th birthday 16 days after I entered. So I entered on February 2nd, 1958, with most of my crowd had entered in September, but there were 6 of us that entered February 2nd, and we always believed we didn't need that long of a time. So actually the one who entered with me, some of the ones were Sister Attracta and Sister Iva Gregory. So, and we were all just together. Out of the 23 of us, there are just 8 of us who were the original group that entered that year.
You know, to go back to your being a boarder here, I know from Rosarian Academy when we had boarders there, you mentioned the mischief. You still were able to have mischief. Can you tell us about an experience that you had?
Well,
you
know how you pay it forward? Well, my class paid it forward to me when I entered, because some of the things we used to do in those days, we had to get up and go to Mass and Holy Rosary, and we sat behind the postulants. And if you remember those days, they came back from communion, the head was down. Yeah. And our heads were down too, but what we were doing is under the pew tying their shoelaces together. So a few of those things we did, and we were always going.
Did they know it? I mean,
well, yeah,
did they really?
And they were terrified because they couldn't do anything about it. But anyway, we would venture into places where we weren't supposed to go, especially if we weren't supposed to go there, like the tunnels and up to the bell tower, those kinds of things. But we had a good time.
They didn't kick you out,
No, but after I entered, I was always afraid they would.
Did you do that mischievous stuff?
No, I was good. I behaved myself then. Yeah, I did.
So how many of you entered at that time?
There were 23 of us. Oh, on February 2nd,
There were
six.
just 6 of you, and then
But our reception group was 23.
the
and-
numbers still hadn't begun to swell like they did years later.
No, but the Mary Ann Yans entered
Yeah.
the next year, and they were a very large crowd, over 100.
Yeah, yeah.
But the February crowd usually was pretty small. But we always said we didn't have quantity, we had quality.
You've always got an answer, Kathleen. All right, so then you went out and were sent on mission, and
I've been at a lot of missions, but that's a whole story in itself. Do you remember intercession
yes,
and intercession?
Yes.
The day I made first profession.
maybe you can explain that for
Oh, okay.
our YouTube people that might not know what that is.
Intercession was a time where you packed in one course to be able to get the credit for it. And the one I was in was a week course in, of all things, economics. So we made first profession in the morning, went to class right after that. We had class in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening. So it was on Wednesday morning. So now the third day I had this class of intercession. And I was called into Mother Gerald's office. And she told me that she was going to send me to Charlottesville, Virginia, Holy Comforter Parish, which was a mouthful to
Right.
speak, especially when you answered the telephone. But Sister Bertha was in there when she told me this, and she said to Sister Bertha, just give her a C in the class. Oh, okay. Anyway, Mother Gerald said to me, what are you going to do if they ask you how old you are? Because I was just 17 and a half. And I thought, this is probably a trick question. So I better think about this. So I answered her and I said, well, Mother, I would just tell them I'm older than you think. And she laughed and sent me on my way. So I was to take the train to Charlottesville, Virginia with Sister Agnes Louise, of all people.
Oh my.
Sister Arnold met us at the train station in Washington, D.C., but the problem with me was I got train sick because I hadn't ever ridden on a train overnight in my life. And so for the first 3 days I was at the House of Studies with Sister Arnold, I was sick. I was green from the travel sickness. And then the sisters from Charlottesville didn't come and get me for 2 weeks. And I said to Sister Arnold, well, where are they? She says, well, they didn't know you were coming. And so they had to redo the whole household in terms of bedrooms to find a spot to put me. So I had third grade there, and our school was in a plantation 20 miles away from where we lived. And I had Sister Ann Jerome mentored me with my plans, and I remember the very first day of my third grade, I had all my plans. By 10 o'clock, I had done the whole week's worth of work.
I've heard that story.
I went to Sister Linus, who was the principal and superior. I said,
right.
what do I do next? Anyway, it all worked out, and it was a good year.
Wouldn't you love to meet some of those students, or maybe not, that we had when we didn't think we knew what we were doing? We did know what we were doing,
Well,
but we didn't feel it.
I want to tell you about this 17-and-a-half-year-old who was going to say you're older than you think. One of my students was the nurse at our doctor's office. His mother was the nurse. And I got very sick with the flu and went to the doctor, and the nurse says to me, his mother, how old are you? I said, oh no. I said, I gotta tell the truth. I said, I'm 17 and a half. Now come on, sister, I have to have, how old are you? So I told her a second time. And then she asked me a third time, and I said, really? I'm 17 and a half years old, and she started to cry. She couldn't believe it. So that was one experience with one of my students. But I do remember many of them. But I was just there a year, so.
Was that a coal mining area? No.
I don't think so. It was
No.
a college town.
College town. Okay.
Monticello, the University of
Right,
Virginia, and
okay.
all of that was in that town.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on my first home visit, and again, this is my first time going west, anywhere west of Iowa. I had never been. And my family was living in California, and when I got there, both my mother and father were not well. And so while I was on my first home visit, one of the sisters had let Mother Gerald know the situation, and I got a telegram changing me to the west. So I was then sent to Delano, California. Now, kind of to back up a little bit, my experience in Virginia was such that it was a total segregated town and community. It was the first time I saw black water fountains, black bathrooms, black people who had to sit in the back of the bus. And even though I grew up in Chicago, I didn't understand that. So when I went to Delano, this was the time of Cesar Chavez. So I'm going to another culture now.
Right, right.
And going there, the students we had at St. Mary's were both the owners of the vineyards, children, and the children of the pickers.
Right.
That was a very interesting experience. Again, I was only there a year. I was sent next to St. Mary's Oceanside, which I loved. We were just 3 blocks from the ocean. And that was the marine town. So now most of the children I taught were from marine families. That was very interesting as well.
What made it so interesting?
Because they really had a different structure in their lives than most of the children I had already taught. In terms of, this is the way it is. You know, if something was awry in terms of their learning, you know, you could work with the parents and they would work with the child and consider, you know, what options they had in terms of what could be further helpful to this child in his or her learning process. Mm-hmm. So I found them easier to work with respect to kind of advocating for their child mm-hmm. and what was best for them.
You didn't experience that in the other 2 cultures?
To tell you the truth, hardly did I ever see the parents in the other 2 cultures.
Oh, okay.
But again, I was only there 1 year, so. So I was in Oceanside 3 different times I was sent there. In between 2 of those times, I was sent to St. Peter's in Henderson. And I was there 2 years, and this time I had the Air Force children, and the casino workers' children. I had 1st grade, and I used to bring in snacks for breakfast because I thought I have to feed these children before they can learn, especially those whose families were working in the casinos, because typically they came without breakfast, you know. Mm-hmm. So I remember that about St. Peter's. We were right across Boulder Highway from the hospital, Rose de Lima Hospital, and Sister Georgianne and Sister Marie Bridget were both there then, and we had a great time mm-hmm. together.
With Bridget, I'm sure you did.
Yes,
yeah.
we did.
Yeah.
There's lots more I could tell about each place, but we'd be here till tomorrow.
But they eat. It sounds as a significant experience was that when you had with the segregation.
Yes.
And then with the military.
Yes.
And that certainly left an impression on you.
It did. And
How did that impact you personally in your life?
well, one of the things that my first mission, how it impacted me, was to look at the fact my mother had taught us all not to be prejudiced,
Okay.
so I couldn't understand this.
Yeah.
And it began my process of looking at myself in terms of how do I treat people that are different from myself? What do I do with that? And then that got even more enhanced when I was sent to St. Raphael's in Los Angeles, where it was very close to Watts, and I had 7th and 8th grade then. That was quite an experience. But what happened when I lived there was you went from the convent to the school to the church for Mass and back because it wasn't safe on the streets. And so that was another part of
How was it in the classroom, knowing you lived in that?
I loved them. And
The students were?
Yes, I did. And of course, I was teaching math and science. Most children love that. Some people are allergic to math, but I got them so that they could learn it.
Good.
But one of the things I did there, because of my desire to help break down these barriers, was I had been in Oceanside and I loved it there. So I planned an outing for my 8th grade class. We chartered a bus and I worked it out with the 8th grade teacher in Oceanside that we were coming to visit for the whole day. And most of those children had not been out of the cement city
Yes, yeah,
ever.
Yeah.
So it was about a 2-hour ride on the bus, and we got to Oceanside, and they were welcomed with open arms, my class. And our job was to plan the prayer for the day, which I did with my class, and then the Oceanside students hosted us. For lunch, we met with them, we played with them, we prayed with them, and when it was time to get back on the bus, nobody wanted to go home. So that was one thing that I did because of my understanding of needing to bring them together.
Do you
somehow.
recall any responses or any words that your kids had relative to the experience?
Well, I had said to them, now they are hosting us, so I want you to be polite. I want you to, welcome them as well. And I was giving them instructions. And when you eat lunch, because in our cafeteria half the time the food was on the floor in LA, I said, now, if you don't care for what they're serving you, just put it aside. Don't throw it on the floor. So I'm giving them all these tips.
Threw the food on the floor.
And we get back on the bus to head back to LA, and they said, you know what, sister? I said, what? And they said, that wasn't as bad as you said it was going to be. So they had me on that one, because they loved it, and they continued writing back and forth, pen pals, and they loved it, and so did the Oceanside.
That was great, and you just wonder now how did that change some of them, and you probably don't know at this time, but
No.
It had some impact on
It did,
on
yeah.
you. So where else did you, another place that
St.
perhaps,
Patrick's, Larkspur.
you don't have to go through each one, but
No.
another mission that really had impact on
Okay,
you?
well, that would be La Jolla,
Positively.
California.
Oh, I know.
I was principal there for 25 years.
Yes.
The challenge I had there was to form community. And because when I got there, parish, school, teachers, parents, students were all awry.
Because?
Well, there was a principal that had been there 1 year before me, and the board was in opposition to the pastor, and nobody was getting along. So I hired a whole new staff because the staff left. And I said our goal is to form community first. So I started with my staff. We worked together, we prayed together, and we played together. And so we were the community whose charge was taking care of these children and moving out to the broader community and trying to get acceptance all the way around. And to this day, the community that we formed there for 25 years still exists, and it's wonderful to see.
And what about your special friend?
Sister Donna,
Yes.
she lived with me there for 37 years. She was my vice principal, first grade teacher, and then I was we were the first school to open a learning disabilities program in the diocese. And of course, all the teachers had to be trained, the parents, everybody. Well, Sister Donna worked in my learning after she retired from first grade teaching after 50 years. She did individual work with students who had learning differences.
And she had to come to Adrian, and you accompanied her.
Yeah, I would
and
not let
stayed.
her come by
Yeah,
herself.
And you stayed.
I stayed, and
Yeah.
you know, the transition was extraordinarily difficult.
I know.
But to this day, and I've always thought this because I've been in so many places, especially when there were challenges or I wondered, or what's this? I always knew, and I know now when I look back on this, that wherever I am, I'm supposed to be. Even now that I'm at the Adrian Ray Literacy Center and didn't get there on my own. So that's how I feel. And I was glad to be those 3 years with Donna on her final years and months of
You
life.
were so present to her, so
Yeah.
good to her.
Well, she would have been doing the same thing for me.
I know, but
I know that.
that was extremely difficult for you.
Yeah, it was very difficult. But she's still right here and always will be. Yeah. And there's lots more I could tell, but the
Well,
time's
we'll just
up.
have to sign you up.
No.
After we've done the whole congregation, then we'll put you down as the first one that wants to continue your story.
You know, this is the second time.
But you didn't get anything out the first time. But at this point, what gives you passion and energy besides the Literacy Center?
The fact that I wake up to a new day,
Oh, nice.
and I just thank God for this new day, because especially living in this environment, you don't know when it's going to be your last new day.
Isn't that true?
And
Constantly before us.
yeah, it is constantly before us, and it's difficult. But you know, I can relate to all of the sisters who are part of each of their lives. The love and support of our sisters here is beyond anything anyone could imagine. And I appreciate that and am grateful that I have this experience now in my life. I have no idea what's going to happen next, but I don't need to know anyway.
To conclude, is there something that we don't know about you that would surprise us if you told us?
I love to fish.
Oh, no, I didn't realize. And how often do you go fishing now?
Never.
And all these lakes we have here in the great
Never.
state of Michigan?
Well, when I was in California, I always had my fishing tackle in the trunk of my car. And when I was teaching high school before I left, I'd tell the boys in my class, my tackle's out in my car, and this is why. In case I'm going by a lake or a stream, I can just pull over and wet my line.
Well, you need to get a tackle box.
I do. I know. Well, I fish when I go back west with my brothers.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Okay, well, I know you have a lot more to tell, Kathleen, but thank you. Thank you for
Oh,
sharing your story and
welcome.
even your challenges when you were a boarder. I can imagine what some of the rest of those stories must be.
Oh, there's lots of them.
And especially the example that you were. I know a lot of people said it, but I can just personally say it, in your loving care of Donna and how tragic or how hard that was. You came here to be with her, and then, you know, you saw her on the last part of that journey. You were just such a wonderful friend.
Yeah, and she was a wonderful friend.
Yeah. And also, thank you for your work and your leadership over at the Adrian Ray Literacy Center. That's a great service
It is.
to the congregation and especially to the Adrian community.
And it's another dimension that I'm learning,
I know.
you know, in terms of, well, right now, with our enactments, it's right where I should be. And I'm pleased to be there.
You stay on this campus long enough and you get stretched in so many
Well, I am.
so many ways. Yeah, if you're willing to be
You're
where
on
you're
this
supposed
board,
to go.
that board.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you and have a great day.
Well, thank you, Peg. I enjoyed this. Thanks a lot.